President-elect Mr. Sunil Vijay telephoned me and invited me to deliver the keynote address at the AGM of the National Chamber of Commerce. He told me that he would like someone to address an unusual, atypical subject. And he said he thought of me. I don't know if that's a compliment or not. And I asked him, what do you have in mind? And he said, what about branding Sri Lanka? I said, okay, but with one proviso. I said, I want to make one change. And the change is branding Sri Lanka with a question mark. Because I believe that branding Sri Lanka is fraught with many challenges and constraints, which I will attempt to lay bare over the next few minutes in my brief presentation. Let us begin with a formal definition of nation branding. Nation branding is a field of theory and practice which aims to measure, build, and manage the reputation of nations. So we'll see that nation branding belongs to the larger genre of reputation management. And there's much that has been written about reputation management. And nation branding falls within that larger category. I would like to, at the outset, explore a few myths about nation branding and draw your attention to a couple of important distinctions. The first one is that there is a fundamental difference between a nation brand and nation branding. The nation brand is a set of mental associations or impressions people have of a country, anyway, whether you like it or not. So all countries have a brand image. But nation branding, on the other hand, is a concerted, conscious effort to put together a positive image, an attractive image of a country. So this distinction must be clearly noted. Perhaps more importantly, the distinction between national image and national identity must be clearly noted. National image is a projection. It's about who you say you are. You can say many things about yourself, about your country. You can put together a very attractive communications program, a catchy line, a pretty picture, a compelling communications program. Now that's your projection. That's your national image. But on the other hand, we have the national identity. And that is who you actually are on the ground. Now, if there is a fundamental mismatch between the two, then you fail. The point I'm making, ladies and gentlemen, is this. You cannot ask an advertising agency to develop your national branding campaign and sit back. It's all about what you do on the ground. And there must be a match, a fit, a congruence between these two things, the national image and national identity. Our chief guest this evening, Dr. Sarat Amunugama, our guest of honor, Mr. Ajit Nimad Cabral, the outgoing President, Mr. Asoka Hettigoda, President-elect Sunil Vijay, ladies and gentlemen. I coined a phrase in order to make this fundamental distinction. And that is what I call the difference between bolt-on nation branding versus built-in nation branding. So if you are really thinking about this much debated subject of nation branding, then we must look at not bolt-on, not tagging on a brand image, but a built-in nation branding strategy, which I will attempt to describe briefly over the next few minutes. This is the way I would like to conceptualize it. You need to walk the talk, needless to say. There are things that you have, your natural resource base, your physical endowments. This is what you have as a country. That you need to reckon. Your exports, what you make. Then, of course, you have what you actually do, your policy regime, your behaviors. Now, these three things together form what I call the walk. And that is good, but not good enough. You need to do the talking as well. And that is what you say, the projection that I referred to, the communication that you do. So that is a talk. And what you need to do is to walk the talk. It's not just talk, but you need to put both together. There is an inescapable fact that we need to note, a psychological fact, if you like. And what is that? I believe that a nation's greatest asset is its positive built-in brand image. Because everything is first created in the mind. And if you have a negative brand image, you're doomed. You lose the plot. So everything begins with a positive built-in national brand image. And I think that's why it's so important to develop and project a credible, coherent national brand image. Let's very quickly go back in time and look at the evolution of branding and to place nation branding in context. Branding first began with products. It is reported that the first brand that was actively promoted was the brand Ivory by Procter & Gamble way back in the 1950s. And then companies, corporates attempted to brand services, from product branding to service branding. Then in the early 1970s and the 80s, we see corporate image, corporate branding becoming popular. And many organizations were developing corporate communication campaign to project a corporate brand. Thereafter, we have personal branding. In the 1980s in particular, the American presidential campaigns, they employed communication experts in the area of people branding. And over the last 15 years, in particular, we are now talking about nation branding. Now, there's an important point I would like you to note. As you move up from products to nations, there are three things that happen. What are they? There's greater variability. You can standardize a product which you can churn out in your factory, but it becomes extremely difficult to standardize your output, your offering as a nation. So as you move down, the degree of variability increases, and that's a challenge that you've got to deal with. Not only variability, also complexity increases as you go down. Because unlike a product, a nation has multiple facets that you've got to deal with. And therefore, the ability to control becomes less rather than more. And thirdly and importantly, your ability to control is also diminished as you move along. So the point I'm making is that it's relatively easier to brand products, services, and perhaps corporates. But when it comes to branding people and nations, you're undertaking a very difficult task. Branding of nations. And the question that one may ask rather simplistically is this: can nations be branded like branding soap? What is the answer to that question? Let's look at what the experts say about this loaded question. Can nations be branded like branding soap? Let's look at what this branding expert says. Wally Ollins. The idea of a nation as a brand, as Kellogg's cornflakes is a brand, is a very big mistake. Let's look at what Interbrand, the brand consulting company, says about this whole subject. Trying to market a country as a mountain highway inhabited by rustic peasants, may not serve the interests of those wishing to promote the country's budding industrial infrastructure to foreign investors. What are we talking about here? We're talking about the complexity of the offering. There are many facets, and one facet may be at odds, at variance with the other. And therefore, to present a holistic offering becomes extremely difficult, as you can see from this quote. Here's another quote from Interbrand, which describes the difficulty of nation branding. Unlike product branding, place branding is seldom under the control of a central authority. Government or industry associations are rarely in a position to dictate policy to stakeholders. So here again, the problem, the difficulty of controllability. So the point is clear. Nation branding is fraught with challenges and constraints, as I said at the outset. However, there have been many recent attempts at nation branding. Just looking at a 5-year window, look at the countries that have rather successfully branded their nations. A quick listing of such countries. Recent attempts at nation branding: Taiwan, Turkey, New Zealand, Vietnam, Canada, there you are, the list goes. And Spain is a very interesting case in point. Spain is often considered one of the most successful examples of nation branding. Through much of the 20th century, Spain was in dire straits. Today, Spain is seen as a hub of entertainment, art, food, culture. From its Miro-inspired sunburst logo to its cultural, gastronomic, and historical strengths, Spain today is recognized as a desirable Mediterranean destination. A very successful attempt at nation branding, where they have overcome the challenges and gone beyond the constraints that I referred to. Branding nations is tough. That's what I've said so far. So why brand nations? Why try in the first place? And my response is rather simplistic. You go overseas and you're in a gathering and somebody says, "Hey, do you know he comes from Sri Lanka?" There can be two possible responses. The first response could be,